Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the podcast that shares ideas on how to upgrade your lead generation. Here is your host, Glenn Schmeltzley.
Welcome to Funnel Reboot, where we explore how to upgrade our lead generation. We're on to a new book in our summer marketing book series. This one's about using artificial intelligence for advertising. Hey, do you have a book you like and you'd like to hear from its author? I love getting feedback like that. I invite you to mention me at Funnel Reboot on social media, or go to the website funnelreboot.com, fill out the form, or you can even leave listener feedback on a voicemail calling 613-703-7073. I would do everything I can to get back to you. Chess Grandmaster Garry Kasparov was famously beaten in 1997 by a supercomputer built by dozens of IBM technologists. A Slate article looking at how Deep Blue changed chess said the change here wasn't just that a computer could win, but that a computer could help human players win if incorporated into their training regimens effectively. Well, the same thing seems to be happening with PPC platforms. Similar to what happened in the chess world, in the PPC world, pay-per-click, since 2011, Google has been integrating AI into many of their products. And every campaign feature that Google Ads now rolls out seems to take away control from us humans and give it to their machines. So if we're going to follow Kasparov's lead and get better at this game with the AI, the question becomes, what's the process for training an ad platform's AI? Especially when it's writing programming that only it knows. Even the technologists running it don't know. Well, I think some answers are contained in the book, Digital Marketing in an AI World. Our guest was one of the first 500 employees at Google, where he spent 10 years building AdWords, as it was known, and teaching advertisers how to get the most out of the product. He was the Google Ads evangelist. Today, he serves as co-founding CEO of Optimizer, a PPC management software system. He is a fixture on the marketing conference circuit, and he's blazed new trails with industry learning, especially during COVID, through Optimizer's PPC town halls. Let's go hear from our guest, Fred Vallaeys. The book we're profiling today is Digital Marketing in an AI World, and we're so fortunate to be speaking with Fred Vallaeys. Welcome to the show, Fred.
Thanks for having me on, Glenn. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really glad to. So you bring a unique perspective to this world. Maybe we should start with what the background is, why you, as the question goes, and how you came to have a really good knowledge of how computers in general were able to be used for building the world's largest, intent-based marketing platform, and how it's come to go even beyond just, smart humans building smart machines, but in fact being a machine-built platform. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So I suppose my claim to fame in the industry and the reason that I'm someone that perhaps people listen to when we talk about automation and PPC is that I had a seat at the table. I was at Google in the very early days. So I have a very unique skill, which is I speak Dutch. There's not that many Dutch speakers here in the Bay Area. And Google was looking to hire someone back in the day in 2002 to really help take AdWords. It was called AdWords back then. Now it's called Google Ads. But they wanted to take AdWords into its sixth language. And so they needed someone who spoke Dutch and could help them. So, I was really lucky to join Google in 2002 and then helped them translate into Dutch, but also very quickly became engaged with the product team and developing many of the features we work on today. So, and specifically the ads editor, I was on the core team of about 6 people that started that way back when, the first version, when we didn't have anything like it. Was involved in the acquisition of a small company called Urchin, which most people nowadays know as Google Analytics. sat on the quality score team for like 7 years. And quality score was interesting because that was really the first machine learning application in PPC.
That's great. And I think minor claims to fame included things such as the product engineers asking for your help to come up with a blacklist of words in Dutch that they should know not to allow bidding competitions for. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Are you asking about the porn filter?
Yeah.
I know. That's always a fun one to talk about. So yeah, because Google has this thing called Safe Search, right? And Safe Search basically is a way that they don't show adult content on non-adult searches. But the way that these filters work is Google has this scoring mechanism. And so that's what the machines do. That's what the machine learning does. It basically looks at all the queries, all the searches that could happen, and it tries to rank them on a scale of what it thinks is like least pornographic to most pornographic. Now, the problem is when they do this in Dutch, they need someone to kind of draw the line and say, well, okay, this type of search, definitely not, right? But this type of search, now we're kind of like starting to cross that line where it could potentially mean something looking.
Maybe the vendor is into boudoir photography.
Exactly, right? And so it's not so much on the vendor side, right? It's more on the search side. So if someone, user is searching for a boudoir photos, yeah, that straddles the line, right? But then all of a sudden you go to the other side of that line and it's like, yeah, they're just looking for, we all know what they're looking for. And so I had to draw the line between those search terms to basically say, okay, maybe at a level of 89% where the machine thinks it's a pornographic search, maybe that's the level at which me as a human, I'm like, yeah, that's definitely on that side of the line. And then from henceforward, any search that happens, the machine still does the scoring on whatever the search term is. But based on where I've drawn the line and what percentage I've set, that's when it says, okay, either we do or we don't show ads for adult content. Right. And that was my minor claim to fame and a little fun project.
But thank you. And I think it's a great way of helping illustrate to people that are new to this, at its most basic, how machine learning works. You have to prime the pump. There has to be a human being who begins. I mean, yes, you've got your engineers who are actually building the algorithm, but if I can contrast this with SEO, right? If people who are maybe working on a decades-old view of SEO, they may think that there is some reviewer who is sitting, back at headquarters and looking at their website and actually dictating how worthy that site is of being ranked. The truth is, there has at some point been a human involved, but that was just to kickstart the machine on being able to itself understand what factors would lend a site to being ranked highly. And so, wouldn't you agree that, we need to kind of update our thinking on how the machines are being used, because they will be injected that little bit of seed information, but really from there on, the only interaction the human, at least back inside the walls of Google, would have is to inform the machine on how to better do the assigned task.
Exactly. And I think what's so fascinating about that is the reason Google does this is so that they can scale their business. And I mean, look at the last quarter's revenues. Like I look at the revenue, I was like, oh my God, that's how much they used to make in a year when I was at Google. It's like, it's growing so fast. And the only way that you can have such a fast scaling business and keep up is through automation. And that's also my message then to all of the listeners today who are in PPC. It's don't fight automation, like leverage it. You complement automation, because that ultimately is what drives hugely successful businesses these days. But you're right, the way that automation comes about is not some like magical entity that just floats into the room and then it works. It does need human input to tell it, what is the job of the automation? What is the job of machine learning? And I think another really good example is, we've all heard how machine learning can recognize images of cats at a pretty high accuracy rate.
Yep.
But exactly like your example, we had to give it pictures that said, okay, these are cats. Humans have looked at these are cats. And for some reason, we'd like to find more pictures of cats. So now go and learn how you identify what a cat is. And that's kind of a stupid, silly example, but the same thing in PPC, right? It's like, let's find ads that we think people are going to love. But that again starts with a human element. It's like, what do humans love? Well, they love more factual ads. They love a strong call to action. So there might have been a team, and in fact, there was a team at Google of ad raters, and they get presented with ads and they rate it in certain criteria. And then the quality score team specifically, it looks at what is sort of the bottom of the barrel in terms of advertising today. Like, what scams are out there? How are advertisers, bad players, trying to dupe consumers?
Yes.
And then we say, okay, well, here's a set of examples of that. And now you, machine, can you figure out a commonality? Can you find us more of this? Can you find it automatically without having to put humans in? And honestly, when we did this in the beginning, the machine did a pretty poor job. And so it was a very iterative process. We'd have to say, well, we found some bad players, but we also hit too many good players. Right. And then we can't launch. We have to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. And, never say never. But I think you, in the book, try to calm people with saying that things specifically like ad copy, they're not on the short list of things that Google is intending to have machines completely write themselves. Look, there are many areas within the platform that Google very much intends to wrest control away from advertisers, or at least have an automated option that, will take over for advertisers. But I like what you said about ad copy itself. You said the reason we don't have Google's computers writing all the ads is that they would all end up looking the same, and then they would stop evolving because the machine doesn't have any variations to test against itself. Right. So I guess what I'm saying by that is their strength can also be seen as a weakness on the machine's half, where the human is strong.
Exactly. And so the way that evolution works is random. And okay, so I'm not a biologist here, so I'm probably going to get this wrong in some level. So apologies for that. But basically, the way I understand evolution to work is variations get introduced genetically just by complete chance. And then some of those that tend to work well stay in the system. And it's the same thing with ads, right? So if you have a system where the machine is just trying to write these perfect ads, the level of variation that gets introduced is so little that the machine stops learning from, oh, hey, maybe times have changed. And to take a really good example right now with the pandemic.
Okay.
If you had said, Google, create ads that are really appealing to people, image ads, well, they'd all have happy, smiling people doing stuff. But then the pandemic hits, and all of a sudden, that's complete taboo because now we have to wear masks everywhere. So a picture showing people hugging each other without a mask, that doesn't fly, right? And for that to become the new norm, a human has to go in and say, well, that's how the world is now. Let's try that. Let's take a picture where we put masks on. And then all of a sudden, that seems to be the ad that people gravitate towards because it's a representation of the reality we live in. And that's the problem with the ad generation and just letting the machines do it. They would never think to put a mask on someone.
Right. Now, they're very strong in that you talked about scale. So if we have historical data points, and in PPC, anybody running something, you can quickly get up to hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of historical data points, is that the machine will steamroller along, with that historical context, and it'll do an amazing job of predicting the near future, so long as it's got the time span that would catch everything like seasonality. But yeah, by that same token, when the world changes, or even a small change happens in our category, we as humans, we can see that. It's blindly obvious to us, but we have to kind of give the computer an FYI to say, all right, well, this has changed for you. And
Exactly.
you see that as being the long abiding role that both in-house and agency PPC professionals have, right?
Yeah, and I think think of ourselves more as marketers than PPC specialists at some level. We've been so accustomed to pushing all the buttons and setting the dials that Google just didn't do for us. And now things have evolved. Now Google can do a lot of these things for us. So let's get away from the spreadsheet a little bit and let's think about who are we talking to? What's going to resonate with them? Let's get back to traditional marketing.
Yeah, I love that part. And this is where we're going to spend some time because you talk at length about the response and, how, all right, if we've bought into the concept of taking our hands off of the dials and having some of them set to the automated area, to be clear, you are not saying just walk away. What you instead replace that, time that someone was spending on knob turning. You've said, look, think of yourself as having, one of three roles. And at some point you'll be using all three of them. But can you maybe give us the first one that we need to maybe think of in how we respond to this automated way of doing our campaigns?
Yeah, so there's the doctor, the teacher, and the pilot. And I don't remember how I came up with these roles. I mean, it was basically, I think I was blogging for Search Engine Land, and I wrote one blog post on automation, and then I had a month to think about it. And then I came up with these roles. And the reason I came up with them was they're very easy for us to understand, right? We've all interacted with these people, and I think there are some analogous things that we do in PPC. So that first one is the doctor. Now, when you go into a doctor, you usually go for a reason, right? So you're there explaining, okay, doctor, here's what's wrong. Here's what I'd like to have be better. And either I'm sick or I go to a plastic surgeon. And I'm like, hey, I don't like how this looks. So can you help me fix that? Two different types of doctor, but same sort of thing. You talk to them and then they sit there and they say, okay, well, let's look a little bit. So, this is hurting on you. Your knee's hurting. Okay, well, do you go running? So they start to do an analysis. They start to look at your age, at your lifestyle, and they start to figure out, well, it looks like that's probably what's wrong with you, and we might run some diagnostics, but eventually they figure out this is what's wrong. This is how we're going to have a plan for fixing it and getting you to where you want to be. And that's exactly what we do as PPC agencies or specialists. We basically have a manager, a client who comes to us and says, we need to grow revenue. We need to have more profits. And we think a great channel to do that is digital marketing. So what can you do for us? Give us a plan of action. And then within that plan of action, it's actually really fascinating to me today that there's so many ways that you can do things even just within Google Ads. So when it comes to doing advertising and literally the ad text, well, do you go back to the expanded text ad? And that's really the traditional ad that we've had for a while. Or do we try responsive search ads? And then within the ads, do we use dynamic keyword insertion? Do we use ad customizers? Okay, so that's a bunch of questions there. And then it comes to bidding, and it's like, well, do we do manual bidding or automated bidding? I think nobody should be doing manual bidding of any sort. Okay, so assuming that you're on board with that, let's go into automated bidding. But now even with automated,
and just to be clear, the reason is you feel that Google's computers can react to more signals and react with more speed than any human can possibly match.
True, but stepping back from that for 1 second, I'm completely fine with advertisers automating bidding on their own. Right. So, and if that means you're setting a manual CPC, but at least you put some automation in place to calculate those CPCs.
Yes,
that's fine. I don't think that's the holy grail. I think you should probably look more at Google's automated bidding for the reasons that you just said, which is they are the only ones who can set a bid at the time of the auction.
Right.
And that bid takes into account, they say something like 500,000 factors surrounding that particular search. And that's on search, and on display, they say it's about 70 million signals, right? I can't do that. And even if I had those same signals from Google, the problem is I cannot set a bid for every single auction. I have to set a bid for a while, and all of the auctions run against that bid until I change that bid. And so that's why Google is in such a strong position to do this for us. But
yes, and for anybody who, at this moment has been thinking that the exact amount you set to the penny for the bid is actually what goes into the auction. Fred has just shown you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Yeah, exactly right.
It goes far deeper than that. They are setting it is a range. You are seeing over time, usually a mean bid, which uses that as a suggestion. And if anybody wants to go into the depths of the Vickers second bid price auction, there are academic papers written all about this. And but anyway. This is to hopefully give people an appreciation of the depth of what is actually happening and how everybody should tap out and say, yeah, I can't as a human. I just can't.
Yeah, you can't. And there's just many better things you can do. But then, okay, so now you hopefully are on board and say, sure, we'll let Google do it. But which of Google's ways are you going to use?
Right.
By last count, I think there are 6 or 7 forms of automated bidding. At the time I wrote the book, there were a few more. And Google
let's look at those as the doctor would look at them. You've got 6 or 7 choices. So help us understand what a doctor does with that info.
Right. So then the doctor has to really translate the goal of that patient into what's the course of action. And so your client comes to you. And so one client, this is the funny doctor example. I've gone to a doctor basically with my own diagnosis. And here's a funny story. So I had this little rash and I wanted to make sure it wasn't getting bigger. So I took a Sharpie and I drew a circle around it. And then a couple of days later, it's not getting bigger, but it's also not going away. So I go into the doctor and the doctor looks at that and they're like, oh my God, that's really unusual. Like, we've never seen anything like this. And then I'm like, oh, but just to be clear, like, that's my Sharpie line around there.
But I was doing an experiment on myself. Yes.
Exactly. And then they're like, oh, well, in that case, now we understand. But so you equate that to PPC. And I think so many advertisers or companies, they go in and they're like, well, I want to hit a ROAS of 500%. Okay, sure. And then some agencies, they're like, okay, fine, we'll try to hit that. And then 6 months down the line, they're like, well, we've achieved your 500% ROAS target, but we did notice that if you actually get a little bit more willing to give up some ROAS, you make more profit. And so that's really the doctor's role, is distill what it is that the patient is really trying to achieve, but also ask them the questions like, do you really care about ROAS? Because most businesses don't give a rat's ass about ROAS or CPA. I mean, how many times have you been on an investor call and that's been the topic of discussion? Except, of course, if it's Google, right? The companies care about revenues. They care about profits. And so ROAS and CPA, these are dials that we have to achieve those outcomes.
Right. So they're a ratio that expresses, let's call it, efficacy.
Exactly. And so it's efficacy. It's basically a margin efficacy, right? But at which if you're a retailer like Target selling, thousands upon thousands of products, they all have different margins. And then the margin depends on seasonality. Like, is it in clearance or is it like back to school right now? And so everybody's going to want to buy pencils at high margins. But based on that, you have to set different ROAS targets to achieve your business goals. And that's really what the doctor then does, is they say, well, okay, it looks like you have a big business. Let's have a campaign here for these products with that ROAS and a different campaign there with a slightly higher ROAS target because you have better margins. And so, that's sort of that first step of what we need to do. Yeah,
it sounds like it's, a doctor, let's say a novice doctor might just give you something to treat the symptoms. A smart doctor, you mentioned like House, they would look through and say, well, actually, what's the root cause? And what do I have to do? Now, when we flip over to prescribing or prognosis, now we've got kind of an issue of bedside manner, right? And, I live the agency life. So this is very much part of our world of, okay, so now understanding what the issue is and the preferred way of really treating it, we may have some hard news to deliver to the customer, like you would to a patient. If you say, look, you're going to have to undergo a very gritty procedure here, or we're going to have to give you, a a medicine and its formulation does, X, Y, and Z. Can you kind of maybe tell us how the doctor can help in that mode?
Yeah, and that's where I think it's good to have that amazing bedside manner and be friendly with your clients and understand that they don't know PPC at the levels that you do. I mean, ultimately, that's why they hired you, to be that expert. But they also probably want a little bit of hand-holding and like, okay, so you've chosen this attribution model, but that's not what we used to have. And another agency told us differently. So explain that to me, like help me like wrap my mind around it. Right? Because we all want some involvement in our treatments, whether that's medical or PPC. And that's really what the bedside manner is about. So your people skills, as people, hopefully that you're pretty good at them. And that's what you can bring to those clients.
Well, I think you said, if the patient or the customer had a choice of listening to us or listening to a engineer who built the platform, the engineer is not going to have a warm and fuzzy answer, but we will.
Exactly. And that's a fascinating thing to me too, is that, a company like Google, they have so many engineers working on ads, but of those engineers, like very few of them actually advertise. Right. And so they understand small portions of the problem that they're trying to solve and what they've been assigned to. But in terms of the bigger picture and where the rubber meets the road, that's often where it's lacking. And that's where I think the doctor is the one who's gotten the medicine from the pharmaceutical companies, and they've given it to patients, and hopefully they've seen the outcomes and they've seen the challenges along the way. And so they can sort of verbalize that and give some real world guidance. And that, by the way, was really my job at Google for a long time, was, the AdWords evangelist. It was sitting in on the product meetings and helping formulate what should be built, but then also going out into the wild and talking about the interactions that different tools would have. And okay, listen, well, I know you advertisers, you wanted us to build this, but we didn't have enough time, so we built you this. It doesn't do exactly what you need, but here's kind of a workaround of how you can still achieve your goal specifically. And I think that's really where the doctor comes in, right? So you've hopefully, as the smart doctor, you've done it a number of times. You're not going to get that patient to have to go through all the mistakes that your first client or that you yourself for the first time went through when you tried a new tool.
Right. It's adaptive. What's the second rule?
So the second one, why don't we talk about pilot? So airline pilots, the stat that I've heard, I put in the book, is the average one flies the plane about 11 minutes out of each flight. And so there's a tremendous amount of automation happening in airliners. And by the way, like, would you get on a plane with no pilot?
Not no pilot. It sets me back a bit to think about how it's only 11 minutes, but, I guess autopilot's working once the plane is up until the air, until it starts its final approach. So, I'm comfy with that.
Yeah, exactly. And we're comfortable with that. But like, if you take the pilot out of the equation, and actually the planes can land themselves as well. So the plane really could fly itself, as far as I understand, completely fine. Self-driving cars, maybe that's a little bit closer to home. Right. Would you get into a Waymo self-driving car? Would you get into an Uber self-driving car? By and large, they seem to be doing a decent enough job. I think I'll be in one in the next couple of years. I'd be okay with that. But the reason that we still like to have that human control driver, the oversight, is somebody's there for that emergency, right? The time when the computer doesn't recognize something. And that's really what the pilot role is about. So let the PPC machine fly itself, set automatic bidding. But here's the thing, right? So automatic bidding. So it basically uses predicted conversion rates or predicted value that's going to be derived from a click to set your bids, depending on whether you're in a target CPA or target ROAS model. Now, all of a sudden, the system sees that your conversion rate starts to decline. Right. What does automated bidding do? Well, it says decline in conversion rate. So we should probably scale back on the bids, because otherwise we're going to start missing your cost per acquisition target. So bid goes down, 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 keeps going down. And eventually your ads fall off of the first page of the results. Your volume goes way down, but you're hitting your cost per acquisition target, right? Is everything good? Probably not, right? It's not good. So we really need to understand, well, why did conversion rate drop? Was it because your landing page was broken? Right? If your landing page is broken, of course, conversion rates can go down.
Sure.
But,
and that could be something the equivalent of, like turbulence in the air. And, it's going to happen momentarily. But as you said, if the autopilot mistakes the situation that it's in and tries its best to react, if the pilot isn't there to intervene and say, that's okay, that was just a momentary thing, but let's get you back on track. We can have bad consequences.
Exactly. I love that example of turbulence. It sounds to me like seasonality bit adjustment. It's like, hey, we're going to hit some turbulence. Let's turn on the dial that says, forget everything that happens for the next 5 minutes. Let's not make that part of the machine learning model.
Yes. I'm really glad that Google has, in fact, even surfaced more of that for people whose sites have gone down recently, how you can, repudiate that and say, okay, well, just forget about that portion, and just now carry on, right? We have resumed normal operation.
Exactly. As the pilot, you basically sit in that cockpit and hopefully you have some really good monitoring systems and you're kind of keeping an eye on, are things behaving as normal? And then if they are not, that's when you step in and you do the things we just talked about.
That's right. So you give another kind of pilot situation. It's the fighter pilot. And what I loved about that was that they are listening to signals, right? I can only imagine that, with their heads-up display and what's, being piped into their ears, they're hearing from ground control. They're hearing from their fellow fighter pilots. They're, maybe seeing data on the enemy. There's, it's a barrage of information. And only they really can understand in the moment what pieces of information are critical enough that they have to respond to avert a disaster or to take advantage of a critical opportunity, maybe to, beat their enemy. So, you say you have to figure out what sensitivities to set. Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about how we can do that so that, we're able to make a switch when we can without being glued to this 24/7.
Yeah, and that's honestly probably one of the hardest things. There was this other study, I read about it in the Wall Street Journal, but in hospital settings, there's a lot of beeping and monitoring machines attached to people.
Right.
And so they looked at a number of hospitals and they noticed that the nurses had basically tuned out every single alert because the sensitivity was too low. So everything that was happening was critical. Exactly, not good, because then the one time there is actually a critical thing, boom, you don't see it. I think it depends though. Like, I'm the type of person, I can't even figure out Slack, to be honest. I'm more of an email cadence type person. Like, give me a little bit more time, but put the big stuff in there, right? I don't need to know every little detail that happens. But then I have people on my team who do worry about the little details because, if the server goes down, they need to know it. So I think the sensitivity just depends on what level of the organization you're in, what sort of role you play. Yeah. And then hopefully having an alerting system that is specific to your role. So, I don't need to know necessarily about bids being broken, but maybe I do want to know about my ads being disapproved because I'm more on the creative side. And so the trick there is, how do you set that up for yourself? And so I'm a big proponent of scripts, ad scripts. I've written a lot of those and published them for people to use for free. So scripts are amazing because you can set up these really advanced alerting capabilities and you can get them to send you stuff. If you do like Slack, you send it in Slack, or you send it through some Microsoft Teams, or you even generate a text message, send an email. The sky's sort of the limit. And then, of course, if you don't want to build a script, you can always look at a tool like Optimizer and some of the other tool vendors. But what I love is the fact that with scripts, you have so much insight into exactly what's in the code. You can go tweak it line by line. You can make it your own, right? And that's kind of the power, I think, of humans in PPC is you can take a general best practice, but you can make it your own. You can change it so that it really works for you.
And they're, to maybe use the old overused, snowflake idea, they are as customizable as clients, right? And you can get any kind of client, or if you're in-house, a boss, and what that statement is maybe that has been made in a meeting in the past, that the executive, hears that and responds with, a high degree of emotion, or, makes it clear that in their culture, this is a showstopper. So this ability to set your own sensitivities ought to be infused with that kind of information. And that's really what's going to matter. I would imagine you're going to be better off even dialing down some of those non-critical alerts and maybe letting one or two simmer for a while. But if you reacted to the one that was highly important, then, I think maybe small sins might be forgiven.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's know what your client, your boss is going to measure you on, right?
Yep.
Make that the first priority.
So maybe let's switch to the teacher. And I think the teacher, we've already talked about how that initial training needs to be done. But you say, the teacher's job is also to refine the training as needed. I think one of the ones that really hit home for me in the book, you took the example of, let's say you run a small ski resort and a teacher after, let's say a full season of information will be able to intuit that you're going to want to put ads out and spend more on those ads on day when there's been a good accumulation of snow, right? But if the temperature has dropped and there's no snow on the ground, you're not going to advertise those days, right? So we get that, but a machine in a million years may not see that correlation, right?
Right. And so the tricky thing now is that, like we said, Google looks at roughly 70 million signals when it runs a display ad auction.
Yep.
What are these signals? Google doesn't tell us, right? So we can guess pretty well what some of them are. So they will look at previous search history, what device somebody's on, what location, time of day, but snow level, temperature. To what degree do they look at that? And to what degree are they able to correlate those factors with what matters to your business? And that's kind of what the teacher role then is all about, is assume for a second that Google doesn't look at these things. How do you bring that insight to bear on your account? How do you make smart bidding better by bringing that data? And now the problem is that, I wish Google just let us feed in a bunch of data, like here's the stock market, here's the weather, figure it out. But they don't, right? That's not how the system works. But we do have TCPA, we have seasonality adjustments, we have, a number of bid adjustments that do work in conjunction. Not all of them do. Right?
Most importantly, we have the performance data, right? So exactly. If it isn't jiving with what we know that maybe we have our own models that say, if we are having a really good, season at this ski hill, our ads should be providing this many, we should be able to see via the coupons we offer, this much foot traffic coming in or this many bookings. So if we're not, I like what you said, just assume that they don't know it, but, use that data that you have to put some rigor into to say, well, these are what our minimum acceptable results would look like, and keep working at the model, and keep working at what you're giving Google until it's coming into parity.
Exactly. It's how do you map the real world onto the virtual auctions that happen, right? How do you make your inputs produce more business results? And so that's kind of a teacher role. I think it's evolving into a strategist role. And I think in the book, I sort of made a statement that, if you can become a machine learning builder and creator, but I think that's such a heavy lift. And I'm actually writing a second book now. And so I've sort of muted that teacher role. And it's much more about, as a teacher, how do you bring those little pieces of data into the system? How do you make it come to bear on the results that are happening? And so it's a technique we call automation layering. And so the basic premise is relatively simple. Google and the ad engines, they are really, really good at the heavy lifting, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. It's really expensive. It requires a lot of data. It requires super smart engineers. And so let them handle that. Let's not try to compete on that playing field. But once those things are in place, we talked about the doctor and the pilot and the teacher. And all of these roles that they do can actually be super time consuming to monitor what's happening with automation, to look at, which automation combinations to try. So why don't we find little ways, little automations that we can layer on top of Google's machine learning? And they're simple, but they're also smart because they come from us as humans. So they say, okay, well, fine, you can do automated bidding, but I'm going to set some parameters around what it is that you're allowed to do. And to go back to the Dutch porn example for a second. So let's think about maybe a more practical example to PPC. Broad match keywords or even close variants. Okay, so an exact match keyword in Google is no longer exact match because close variants, which could include things that Google considers to have the same meaning, can also start to serve your ads. So that's a little bit worrisome because this is another system where Google has basically drawn a line at some point or at some level. And anything that fits below that line, they're like, that's good enough. We can show those ads to people, even though it's not the exact same keyword. It's kind of the same meaning. But Google controls that. Yeah. I want to control that. I want to be maybe a little bit more conservative, right? And so what I can do is I can set up an automation that looks at performance of search query data. I can look at my search terms report, and I can do a simple calculation of what is the number of characters different between my exact match keyword and what Google just showed me for. And if it's 1 or 2 characters different, then it's probably a typo. And I'm cool with that. Show my ad for the typo. But if it's 3 or 4 or more characters difference, maybe they're actually changing the meaning. And that might be okay, but I want to see it. Tell me what that is.
I want to dig further in. So long as it's at a significant amount, they'll share that reporting. We are also at their mercy with how much they obfuscate. But I like what you said about, let's admit that it's a black box, to some level, but let's also use our own machines to slice it so that we can understand what it's doing for us. And one yardstick I really like that you mentioned in the book was you said, just imagine that inventory of searchers could be stacked from, most expensive to the cheapest. Right. And if they were all going to give you, they don't all give you the same results. Averages never really adequately explain something. So the point is to try and figure out, at least better than your competitors do, how to get that segment of the traffic that is going to be most, best for you at the best, cheapest price. So, right, if we use that kind of as our mantra, then the way that we're using this analysis to judge what those performance results, it should steer us right.
Exactly. And that's sort of where you, and now it's a combination of, all the roles that we've discussed, but it's, how do you take yourself to that next level, knowing that everyone fundamentally has the same automations at their disposal. And these automations, by the way, they're free, right? So back in the day, you could have automations, but you'd have to pay a tool vendor quite a bit of money. Now your base level is get anything you want for free from Google, so long as you pay them advertising dollars. So how do you layer something on top of that that's based on your business insight of what really is going to move the needle? And that's the value you now bring to PPC. And that's why I think there's going to be a role for PPC specialists for a long time, because, the machines are good at helping us, but they're not doing everything.
And our own machines, you lay out that there's up to 5 different levels of how far we can take the automation on our end. If you could boil it down, to just a soundbite, what's at the smallest end and what's at the largest end of our automation in response to this?
Yeah, so I kind of pulled that example from the world of self-driving cars, where they've classified them into 5 levels,
right? Where
level 5 is fully autonomous. So basically you input a destination and then you sit back and the windows are blacked out.
So that would be 5.
That'd be 5. That'd be the best. And then there's there's actually level 0, which is, it doesn't do anything. So that'd be a really old school car.
Yep.
We probably don't even have power windows. And then you have sort of level 1 where it's very small. Even something like budgets, right? So Google automatically stopping to serve your ad if you've exceeded your budget. That's a very simple automation. So you'd be looking at a level 1.
Yeah.
Where are we on the spectrum? Probably somewhere slightly north of half. It's funny because it sort of mimics self-driving cars pretty nicely. Like Tesla's out there saying, yeah, we're level 5 or whatever, right? No, they're not level 5. They're like an advanced level 3. But their marketing hype says they're different. And then, sadly, people do trust it and they make mistakes and they end up losing their lives when they hit a truck. Yeah. And that's why it's so important for us to also understand, and obviously the consequences not quite as dire in PPC, but it is our clients' money, right? We're going to lose our jobs. And
and the way you break it down, I like it, is, again, keeping the car parallel, there are multiple systems, right? A car is doing many things. It's looking forward. It is turning side to side. It is accelerating, decelerating, etc. So if we kind of dumb that down to in a PPC mode, we might be, we have bids, we basically have a couple of things. We can steer, maybe ad copy is, what is visible, there's a number of different factors. And so you basically say you can stack them. And that's where you get into higher levels of automation. And I think we are going from first the levels of automation that are simply like input to the more that we're adding, instead of just passively receiving this information, an advanced PPC professional or team will actually be allowing their automation to somewhat take over and inject more things into Google and maybe even, do the driving completely.
Exactly. And you laid it out really well, but you have these different systems. And so at a level 5, you would expect the systems to really start interacting with each other and make intelligent decisions based on that. Where we are today is the automations run in somewhat siloed ways.
Right.
And bidding does its thing. And so the example I gave about bidding, automated bidding, setting lower bids when your conversion rate goes down because your landing page is broken, it's a great example of siloed systems, right? If something...
Left hand, right hand. They don't know what each other's doing. Yeah.
Exactly. So build that right brain, left brain connection by...
Now, if I play devil's advocate for a second, I might say that as we, move up, maybe we just go to the first level where we're, receiving these different data inputs, and this is great. Maybe it even gives us something like a 10% lift overall in our performance. There's a number of people I know that would say, okay, to move above, right, we're getting heavy into, quant stuff, right? I'm going to have probably things brought into BigQuery. I'm going to have to maybe hire a person who's a scientist and who can help with this. And I have people, coding and doing this, and it's too much bother to, go to those higher levels. You point out properly that, if we at least take Google as an example, yeah, maybe the lift is small, but the amount of money we're talking about is very large, right? So we've kind of some small hinges moving some really big doors.
Exactly. That was on like the quality score team, right? So we'd make these small enhancements that would improve CTR in minuscule amounts. But when you're talking about, what is it now? I think they're going to be 200 plus billion a year in revenue. So, hey, if I can have 0.1% of that, hell yeah. Right. A lot of money.
The way that it's being used, this efficiency will matter. It's certainly money that your competitor is, also looking to receive. I would just encourage people to think about that.
So there's this interesting study I came across from a Boston Consulting Group, and they basically said that advertisers who use automation see about a 20% lift in performance. But more interesting to me was that advertisers who then in some way use a human complement of that automation, who actually manage the automation, they see a further 15% lift. And so those numbers are better than the 1% we're talking about here, and it can actually be meaningful. So I think that's why it's so important to really consider use automation, but then don't just sit back and let it run on autopilot, but do something complementary to that.
That's great. Do you think that optimization score can somehow, maybe indirectly tell us about these small bumps in performance, or at least in how well the algorithm is receiving signals from us?
Yeah, optimization score is sort of fascinating in that from Google's perspective, it's really a headroom calculation. So
What do you mean?
So what they do is they say, if you made this change, we believe you would achieve this much more in terms of headroom, so conversion volume, performance. So, and actually the things you really care about, not just CTR being boosted, but actually like how many more conversions could you achieve. So in that regard, I think Google is actually doing something meaningful. But the thing that we have to be cautious about is, sure, yeah, I can get more conversions, but will those be profitable conversions?
Right.
And that's, again, where we need to layer on top of it. We need to say, sure, great suggestions, but these are getting to be too expensive, right? And it's, again, about that interplay of, it's not just finding new keywords, but they have to be keywords that are at the right price. And then, by the way, like the other thing we didn't really talk about as the doctor is sometimes an advertiser is like, why can't I compete on this keyword? Why is it so expensive for me? Well, maybe your landing page, maybe the way that you answer the phone when you actually get that call. Like, are you selling to these people at the same rate that your competition is? And that can make a huge difference, right? So PPC is not the silver bullet if you haven't fixed and addressed some of your other underlying business issues.
Right. Yeah, it's not lipstick on a pig. Yeah,
exactly. But so yeah, opportunity score, and the way that we look at that from optimizers' perspective is we pull them in through the API. We layer on top a little bit of what we think, and so then we give you the suggestions that we think actually make sense for you. And that's really, I think, the way everyone should look at it, right? It's their suggestions, which great, thank you for giving me suggestions, but take them for what they are and implement the ones that make sense. Just blindly accepting everything for the sake of getting 100%.
Yes.
That's like in quality score. I mean, like the mantra in quality score, if you have a quality score 4 keyword, 4 is really bad, by the way, right? So just to say that.
Thank you.
Exactly. But if it's 4 and you're making profit on it, then, keep it. Don't delete the keyword just to get your quality score to be higher. And that's the thing. It's all about nuance, and machines don't get nuance. We do as humans.
Right. The interplay.
Yeah.
If I kind of take this right to you personally, and I look at, you have authored a book on this, you have co-founded a company whose goal is to provide PPC professionals with tools that will allow this. To me, correct me if I'm wrong, you're not too choosy about the ways in which other marketers go about doing this. You've clearly got a preferred solution for them, one that you believe in, but you're okay with them, home cooking their own. And my question is, in the 2 years since the book's come out, are there things that, have really buoyed your hopes that, people are getting the message? I would imagine you'd be even happy for, agencies or teams that have, gone in-house with something, but that it's doing something along this score of training algorithms, right?
Yeah. And so, I think in the 2 years since I wrote the book, it's surprising to me how much I've come around in terms of like just saying, yeah, Google automation is actually quite good, thanks to just the evolution of machine learning itself. And so I've become more of a fan of it. And then it's also like this whole, I think it's a big mindset change that we need to go through, which is stop worrying about the details that we traditionally have, like bids and keywords and ads, and start worrying more about how you report conversion value, how you choose attribution models, how you bring in your offline data for offline conversion tracking, how you bring your business insights. Like these are all things that we sort of manage at the periphery of the ad system. And then all the details within the ad system itself, that's what the machines are going to do, right? But if we need to inform it at the periphery of what do we really want? How do we really measure it? How does it really contribute to our business? And so you're right. The way that people go about that, I don't particularly care, right? In Optimizer, we have a set of best practices that we've taken from the industry, and we've done a really good job of making those faster to implement. For example, we have really good support for building SKAGs, single keyword ad groups. They're very contentious. Some people hate them, some people love them. I'm not going to judge. But if you want to do them, we make it super easy, right? And then we have the monitoring and alerting tools so that if maybe that was the wrong approach, you'll find out quicker than anyone else. And you can shift your strategy to something that works better. And we have things like the rule engine. The rule engine is basically this massive rule builder. It's almost a WYSIWYG way of building a script. So you don't have to write a single line of code, but you specify everything through logical conditions that we help you construct. And so we've seen some amazing things being built through that. And that's what it's all about. I mean, like, listen, you're all smart people. You've worked with your clients. You know the things that matter to them. And so within this rule engine, we bring in your third-party data. We bring in data from, Salesforce, if you want to, from your spreadsheets, from SA360. And then that's your data. That's what makes, we live in a data society, data economy. The most valuable thing is our data, but you need to be able to do something with it. And so that's what we want to facilitate. And then you can reap the results of that.
Any final thoughts on how, let's say, going cookieless with browsers might throw a wrench into the aims of having even more and more things automated?
Yeah. So third-party cookies going away. Ultimately, it's fascinating because the death of the keyword and the death of PPC has long been predicted based on all this growth in audience targeting. And now this is the other side of that, right? The audience targeting is becoming a little bit more challenging because of the decline of third-party cookies or the demise of third-party cookies. So I think it's just, we intent-based, like you said in the beginning, this is intent-based marketing, and that's still really one of the strongest signals. And Google is going to provide ways to still understand interests, but there'll be interests of the browser, the physical browser that you use to go online. It's just that they won't connect it to, that's Fred's browser or that's Glenn's browser. It's just they'll understand the browser. And one thing that's really fascinating to me too about this is that I have a work profile and a personal profile in my browser. They will actually be in different cohorts from Flock. And so this is great because if you're a B2B marketer, the struggle's always been like, how do I sell a printer to someone at a corporation as opposed to someone for their home use?
Right.
Really difficult. Now, there's actually a chance that cohorts will be built for me as a person, completely anonymously, of course, but it'll be one entity that's my business persona and one entity that's my personal persona.
Right. And so it's more bringing in that kind of big M marketing of, okay, so here's my theory of, the right times and the right places that I want to catch this person. And it's just another example of how I should let the computer sweat the small details while I'm thinking about the big things. Because as you say, it is nuanced enough that it can handle those things, but I have to be willing to imagine and, where possible, place rules or at least guidance that allows it to do its job.
Exactly.
Super. Fred, where can people check you out if they want to find out about the current book, and maybe if you could tease us with where we might be able to get our hands on the new book?
Yes. So I am wrapping up the manuscript on the second book. Hope to have it available in an October-November timeframe. It'll be on Amazon. We'll, like the last one, Kindle edition, we'll have an audiobook version for people who don't want to read the words but want to listen. Follow me at Silicon Vallaeys on Twitter. We'll definitely put it up on there when the book is coming out. And then, of course, check us out on optimizer.com, OPTMYZR. There's no E in Optimizer.
Got it.
Everyone gets that wrong. But we're thankful for Google automatically showing the ads for all the misspellings. But yeah, that's what I'm up to. That's where we can learn more about
Fred,
it.
I can't thank you enough. And this has been a lot of fun to hear your take on it, and again get your perspective from what I consider to be a ringside seat. So for people who've listened to the end today, thank you so much. If you know somebody who you would like to share this with to maybe help update their thinking on how pay-per-click is done, please go ahead. Of course, you can grab the episode wherever audio is listened to. And I'd love it, of course, if you subscribed or gave some feedback. You can catch me at Hey Glennis or at Funnel Reboot.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter at Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.